The Sith do not tolerate failure. This has been a simple truth for the entirety of their existence. Sidious in particular did not tolerate shortcomings from his underlings. Not only were his standards insanely high, but he had an empire with an image to maintain. An empire of invincibility and infallibility. We're fully aware of what Darth Vader did to those who failed him, and he was prone to just choking them out on a first offense. But what did Palpatine do to those that displeased him? And what absolute horror show awaited the man responsible for the failure of the first Death Star? Greetings, students of the Force, and welcome again back to the archives. In Legends continuity, Galen Erso didn't exist, and the design flaw with the Death Star's exhaust port had not been an intentional flaw. The responsibility for that fiasco landed on the unfortunate shoulders of one man, an engineer by the name of Bevel Lemelisk. And following the Battle of Yavin where the Death Star would be destroyed, nothing short of a living hell awaited this man at the hands of Palpatine. The Emperor himself had participated in a myriad of depraved activities, but few things compare to what he did to this single man after the Battle of Yavin. This sincerely is one of the worst things that Palpatine has done to another living being. So without further ado, let us begin. Bevel Lemelisk was a brilliant architect and an engineer who started his career sometime towards the end of the Republic era. From a very early age, he was bloodthirsty, and he was obsessed with weaponry and mass destruction. He constantly dreamed of a single day where he could push the limits of what technology could accomplish, creating superweapons. When the outbreak of the Clone Wars began, Lemelisk began designing attack crafts for militaries, which landed him right in the frontline work of the Geonosians. It would not be long before Lemelisk was recruited to work directly alongside the Archduke Poggle the Lesser on the Death Star. The plans for the orbital battle station had originally been developed by Wraith Sanar as a loose concept. Sanar did not believe the design would really go anywhere though, so he gave it to his friend Tarkin, who immediately showed it to Palpatine. The Chancellor at the time was so taken aback by the idea that he had it immediately put into production, with one added change: a kyber crystal powered super laser with the ability to destroy an entire planet with a single blast. It would then later be given charge to Dooku, who oversaw its development on Geonosis. Over the next few years, progress was made on developing the initial Death Star concept. As an architectural planning for the station commenced, Lemelisk worked alongside the Geonosians to resolve some remaining power supply issues, as well as structural concerns that plagued the design. As Lemelisk refined the plans for the Death Star, he had several significant departures from Wraith Sanar's initial vision. Once the Galactic Empire rose from the ashes of the Republic, Bevel Lemelisk was elevated to Master of Imperial Projects, and would work closely with Grand Moff Tarkin on the Death Star. Tarkin himself was more of a military strategist, and admittedly knew very little when it came to engineering, and this is where he closely allied himself with Lemelisk. Tarkin had several demands for the Death Star, but each time he made a request, Lemelisk took it as a personal challenge to overcome, as Tarkin and Bevel developed an interesting relationship to say the least, though there was someone that outranked them that was not pleased. At some point during the Death Star's construction, Lemelisk had to spend some time in a bacta tank after he was initially choked by Lord Vader and left with a lasting injury. But once he got out of the bacta and back to work, he would be the one to outfit the gargantuan battle station with its hyperdrive, making the entire complex totally self-sufficient. He would later even design the interior following Imperial Navy guidelines so that training new crew members would be much easier. Lemelisk was brilliant, but he was not perfect, and there were gaps in his genius. To sustain the massive super laser array, the station would have to forego all of its most rudimentary shielding systems, and although Lemelisk was confident that the station's surface-to-air defenses would make up for this, we all know that it didn't. At the time that Luke Skywalker pulled the trigger, Bevel hadn't actually seen the Death Star yet. Though he had observed the destruction of Alderaan, he had been quickly reassigned to work on a new superweapon known as the torpedo spheres on the planet of Karida. The architect was none the wiser when the Death Star was destroyed in the Battle of Yavin, so when Emperor Palpatine requested his immediate presence personally, Lemelisk was dressing himself to receive rich commendations. But little did he know that he was stepping into the first day of hell that would become his new life. As soon as he entered the throne room on Coruscant, a cage dropped from the ceiling and closed around him. Palpatine is anything if not dramatic. Palpatine wanted to mentally break this man. The Emperor didn't decide to have him arrested by Imperial intelligence or the Royal Guard. He let Lemelisk believe that he was stepping into a ceremony rather than a trial. It was here that Palpatine informed the architect that the Death Star had indeed been destroyed thanks to a design flaw. a flaw that was his fault. Tarkin was dead, and the infallible image of the Empire was now sustaining a significant crack. The last words that the engineer would hear from the Emperor's own words were, "I am most displeased with your work, Lemelisk." From holes in the floor of the cage, a swarm of flesh-eating piranha beetles crawled its way into the containment unit. These were a species of carnivorous insects that ironically are native to Yavin 4. As soon as one of them bit Lemelisk, all of them began to eat him, slowly tearing away at his flesh. They entered his ears and slashed his eyes. His death was excruciatingly painful and slow, lasting up to an hour before he succumbed to his critical wounds. Shortly following this, Bevel Lemelisk awoke in a cloned body. Palpatine had used alchemy to transfer the Architect's consciousness to a brand new host so that he would not die. Sidious hated Lemelisk, but he knew talent when he saw it. And although he wanted the man executed for his failures, he wasn't about to let someone useful as Lemelisk simply slip through his fingers purely due to spite. He had a much better idea for him now. Not only this, unbeknownst to Lemelisk, he was now Palpatine's guinea pig for essence transfer. Sidious wanted to test this out before using it on himself in the future. But while Lemelisk was still recalling the vivid and horrific memories of his own death, Palpatine made it clear what was going to happen. He would design a new Death Star, one without a single design flaw. Bevel was amazed that he had even been allowed to live, and just like before, he took this new assignment as an intellectual challenge. But now he was motivated by something else: fear, and this would make sure that the new station fit Palpatine's requirements perfectly. He made sure not to replicate the old design flaws this time around with a new solution: the station's exhaust. Rather than comparatively large thermal exhaust ports that had allowed the rebels to destroy the original Death Star, Lemelisk designed millions of millimeter-wide heat dispersion ducts. The ducts served the same purpose as the exhaust port did, but were virtually invulnerable to blaster or torpedo attacks due to the addition of the emergency baffles that would dissipate the energy of any successful hit. Beyond this, Lemelisk improved the super laser itself, ensuring that not only did it have a much faster recharge time, but that it would fire on moving targets as well, such as capital ships. To fend off starfighter attacks, Lemelisk inserted many batteries that could create a blanket of anti-starfire fire. When completed and carrying its full TIE fighter complement, Lemelisk believed that the new battle station would be invincible. But during production, Palpatine decided to motivate the Architect to ensure that there would not be a single mistake. As Vader once said, "The Emperor is not as forgiving as I am." And no one would understand this better than Bevel Lemelisk, who was executed a further 6 times. Whenever Palpatine decided that Lemelisk was acting too slow, or had a lack of enthusiasm or vision, he would simply murder him in a myriad of horrendous ways, each one different from the last. Lemelisk had been thrown out of an airlock, lowered into a vat of molten copper, and trapped in a vault sprayed with clouds of acid. And this is only the beginning. Each time Palpatine brought him back to life in a clone body, this was far worse than even what Plagueis had done to Darth Venemus. At least in that situation, Venemus actually got to die instead of being forced into labor between his deaths. And Venemus didn't have to be tortured to death each time with increasingly more hideous methods simply because Palpatine was bored. Eventually, the new station blueprints were completed, and presenting his designs to the Emperor, Lemelisk boasted that the second Death Star could only ever be destroyed while it was under construction, and once it was done, the weapon was essentially invincible. But someone else learned this information as well: the Bothan spies of the Rebel Alliance, who reported this directly to Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma was then able to amass a fleet over Solist and would launch an attack on the station while it was being built over Endor. And finally, that fateful battle came. The station would be destroyed yet again, and Palpatine along with it, at least for the time being. Once again, Lemelisk had survived the Death Star's destruction, and was relieved to the point of being overjoyed when he learned that Palpatine had supposedly died along with it. There was no telling what would have happened to him if Palpatine had survived, something far worse than death, and Lemelisk knew it. But anyway, friends, this was likely the worst crime that Sidious ever committed against another living being. Bevel Lemelisk would go on to continue designing superweapons, even selling his talents to the Hutt cartel at one point, creating a problem for the New Republic. But at least for now, the weapon crafting warmonger can rest easy, albeit extensively traumatized from his insidious deaths at the hand of Palpatine. The Emperor But tell us, friends, what did you think of this? Had you ever wondered what happened once Sidious got his hands on the man responsible for the flaws of the first Death Star? It's sickening to think that in canon, this could have happened also to Galen Erso, but luckily he didn't have to suffer the way that Lemelisk would. Of course, let us know your thoughts on this in the comments down below, and is there anything worse that Palpatine has done? If there is, we'd love to hear about it. As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel and the archives today, and as always, may the Force be with you.